Welcome to the Rise of the Super Being podcast. I'm Vanderson Pires, and today I'm going to talk with Dr. Theo Dorfling. He's a doctor from the Hurricanes, the rugby team, and also the New Zealand School of Dance and Ballet. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.
Just a quick note, this episode, like all the other episodes, it's sponsored by Combat Room Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So if you want to learn Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, please come to see me and my team. If you want to learn in a really safe, meet cool people, and learn a really powerful skill, come to see me at combatroom.co.nz. Right, Dr. Theo. Such a pleasure to have you here. I know you now for a few years. We have a friend in common, Adam,
yes,
the monster. And it was really interesting because the first time, I think one of the first time we met was your birthday, and Adam organized a private lesson.
That's right.
Yeah,
yes.
and you came to the class and we did some jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
And after you did a few other sessions as well.
Yes, yeah, and I really enjoyed it. The only thing that made it not work for me was the fact that I couldn't commit enough time to it, and I thought it's such a rich sport or an art form that you need to really spend a lot of time doing it to do justice to it and learn the finer bits and pieces behind it. And I just never had enough time that I could do it consistently. So I just found every time I went back, I had to relearn everything again, and so it made it a little bit difficult. But I enjoyed it, and I thought it was as a sport, or like I say, as an art form, I thought it's so amazing. There's so many levels to it. There's a physical level to it. There's a mental level to it. There's I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, and now we bump on each other and doing some weights sometimes.
That's right.
How much of the train do you do? How many times do you do weights per week?
So I train regularly. I train most days of the week. I try and train 7 days a week. And that for me, apart from the physical benefits and things like that, have got such a lot of mental and well-being benefits for me as well. Just it's a great way for me to escape from my day-to-day work and things like that, and not have to think about my work. I love the idea of mindfulness. Is an important thing for me, and the gym is such a good way for me to live it out, because I realize the risk that I stand when I'm in the gym, the injuries that I can sustain and things like that. So I have to be so conscious when I do exercises that I do it right, that I can switch off everything else around me and things like that. And as a form of mindfulness, I think that has benefits for me as well. So,
that's awesome. So Dr. Theo, I'd like to start. So you're from South Africa, right? What was growing up in South Africa?
So I grew up in South Africa in the heart of the apartheid era. So I like to refer to the time as the privileged white time, and it was a life of privilege growing up in South Africa as a white person, and sometimes I have some guilt around that as well. But I've got around that. I've figured out ways that to mitigate that guilt that I feel sometimes about the fact that I had opportunities that a lot of my friends never had. I grew up on a farm in an isolated area in a small little farming community, and we lived quite isolated, and there were no other white friends for miles and miles around my farm. So the farm that I grew up with, so all my friends were black, and it was always an issue for me, the fact that I have all these black friends that were my best mates, but they were not allowed to go to the same school that I went to. They were not allowed to get on the same bus that I got onto when I went to town and things like that. They had to sit in separate areas, and they had to live in separate areas from where I grew up. And although my parents were very conservative, they always allowed me to have an open mind, or they gave me the space for me to develop an open mind make my own decisions about who my friends were. And there was never any pressure from my parents about who my friends were. But at school, that was quite different for me. At school, I experienced a lot of criticism from my white friends at school because of my association with my black friends. And some of it was very derogative, and the names that I got called because of that was very, at times, very hurtful. But again, it probably helped me to develop some resilience in the face of criticism like that, and to know that I can stand up. And I remember my mum always used to say to me that you always have to remember that although nobody is better than you as a person, you also know better than anybody else. We're all the same. There's a very thin layer on the top that make us different, but underneath that, we're all exactly the same people. And we have the same beliefs. We have the same dreams for ourselves. We want to achieve the same goals in life. So that gave me a little room to develop my own way of thinking, growing up in an era that was very restricted. I mean, the government in South Africa controlled everything you did. I mean, it was no better than a full-fledged communist country where people's thoughts were controlled by the government and by the media. The government controlled the media, which controlled the people. And so we were taught things, and we learned things about South Africa that when we moved over to New Zealand 25 years, we read things about South Africa that we had no idea about.
Wow, that's interesting.
About what the government did and how they oppressed people and how they oppressed the differences, different points of view. I mean, the obvious things we knew about. We knew about the Nelson Mandelas and the big things that was all over the news and things like that. There was no way of hiding it. But what happened in the dark recesses of the night and things like that, we had no idea. And the government just absolutely controlled the people's thoughts. So coming to New Zealand was when we first came here, that was one of the things that blew my mind is how free people can be, how you can live a life where you can think what you want, you can say what you want, and without a fear of anything happening to you as a result of that. So it was mind-blowing. But I read a quote much later on in my life that I thought fitted in well with the way that I lived, and that was that I'd rather be excluded because of who I include than be included because of who I exclude.
Wow, that's powerful.
And yeah, that struck me as well as that. Wow, how if your friends exclude you from a circle of friends because of the people that you associate with, that's their loss. That's not your loss. And I'd rather be excluded from those people anyway than be included just because I don't mix with certain people because that's what they want of me.
Yeah.
So that was a very powerful quote for me, and it's part of how I try and build my life and how I try and always be inclusive in what I do. And it goes through for me. It has a much wider implications for me as well. When I look at, like I say, I grew up very conservative. I grew up in a very strict Protestant Christian church. The Dutch Reformed Church is a very restrictive environment. They again control what you think and what you believe and what you accept. Authority is always right. You're never allowed to question authority. People that are put in places of authority, like your teachers, the government, the police, your parents, you're never allowed to challenge any of those people because they are there because God put them there and they're there to control you. And so I think when I look at religion, I practice those values that I was taught as a Christian, the Christian values, the things that I believe are the true Christian values about love and compassion and things like that. But I think what struck me with most religions, and it's not exclusively with Christian religion, I think most religions are too exclusive. You have to fit in a certain box to be part of a religion. And I think that restricts you as a person. And
right.
It restricts not only you as a person, but it also restricts your God that you believe in. Because I think if you look at, if you believe in God, and I think again it's God is a word, and a word as a signpost, and what it means for me is quite different to what it means for you. And like every word we use in our language, what you think of that word has find different values than what I think about the same word. And I think God is one of those words.
Mm-hmm.
It's a signpost, and it means something for me, but it means something for somebody else, something completely different. I think if you look at say Christianity as a religion, we look at God and we look through a filter, we look through a lens at God, and that lens is what we were brought up with, the things that we read as a child, the things that we were told as a child, our experiences as we grew up. It changes our view of what we look at.
Mm-hmm.
So we look at God and we see, for instance, we see this square, and we perceive that's the God, and we put that down in our Bible, and we confine our God to that square that we see. Somebody from a different faith can look and see a square as well, but it's a completely different square to what you see. And then if we step back, we see that we're actually, all of us are looking at a box. It's not a square that you're looking at, but you only see the one side.
It's all about the perspective, huh?
Yeah, and it's confined by what your experiences in life.
Right.
So we confine our God by doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And if somebody doesn't agree with you, you exclude them, and they become the other side. They've got the wrong point of view because they're not the same as you. So we exclude them. I think that's. Religion is supposed to be an inclusive thing. And even as a Christian, Jesus Christ came to earth to include people. He ministered to people that had different views to him. And that's how I see how we should practice our religion and our faith.
That's interesting. So, Dr. Theo, how did you what's your motivation to become a doctor? So did you study in South Africa?
I did. My primary qualification was in South Africa,
right.
And then I came over, like I said, 25 years ago, and I did some further studies here. And I'm continually busy studying. I've never really stopped. I've continued studying all my life. But my primary qualification was in South Africa. And the interesting thing is I never ever wanted to be anything other than a doctor. I can remember I was 4 or 5 years old, and I wanted to be a doctor, and that's all I ever wanted. Before I started school, I wanted to be a doctor.
For a specific reason? Or?
No, it was just that's all I ever thought about doing. Probably one of the things that could have probably influenced me subconsciously that I was not aware of. In 1967, I was born in 66, so it's a little bit too early to say that the specific incident was what changed my point of view or shaped my point of view. But in 1967, Chris Barnard performed the first heart transplant on a human being in South Africa. And it was work that was started in the States in the late 50s and things. They started working on heart transplant on animals, but he conducted the first heart transplant on a human being. And the guy, Louis Wyszkanski, he lived for 18 days after the heart transplant and died because of complications. They used such massive immunosuppressive drugs to try and stop his body from rejecting the new heart that he got, that he developed infection and died as a result of the infection. And so in the early 70s and mid-70s, they developed the technique a lot. And there was a lot of that was in the media and things when I grew up, when I was little. I think to a certain extent that may have subconsciously influenced my view. But never ever wanted to do anything else. And in the late 70s, my grandmother was diagnosed with cancer, and we moved to the farm where they were living for my mum and my dad to help look after the farm and help support my grandparents. And it was, like I said, it was quite remote. It was far away out of town. And so my grandmother, she couldn't go in to see the doctor all the time. And she, in the later stages, was in quite a lot of pain. And so the doctor wanted to admit her into hospital and keep her in hospital. And my grandmother wasn't keen on the idea and things like that. And I said, well, I'm prepared to help. And so my grandmother needed regular morphine injections and things like that, and I started doing that for her, and I was 9 years old.
Wow.
and started getting involved and gave her 4 hourly, did the injections for her and things like that. So I had a very early introduction into healthcare and things like that.
Yeah.
But then I look back, and even before then, again, that it was probably something that I stumbled across when I was little. Is I always seemed to have there were incidences, small little incidences where when we grew up, my mum had one sister, and they both each had 2 boys each, and so us as cousins, when we turned 5, my grandfather would give us a calf as a present, and so that whatever the produce from that calf was, if it was a female calf and she had offspring and things like that, you could sell that and you get the money for that and things like that. And so the calf that I got very sick very early on in its life, and my granddad was a very experienced farmer. He said, "Look, it's not going to survive, but don't worry, I'll give you the next one that comes around will be yours, so don't worry." And that was just not good enough for me. So I went and I sat with this calf and prayed as hard as I could. And the calf survived. The calf survived. And so all of a sudden there was this, almost like this little something that stirred in me that said, one other quote that I quite like is they say, "The meaning of life is to find your gift, and the purpose of life is to give the gift away." And so later on it dawned on me that this was my gift. The fact that and I'm not saying like spiritual healing or anything like that, but just the ability to use my talents to become a doctor and use those talents to give to other people. And that was the first sign for me that there was a gift, and that this was my gift, is the fact that I can help other people and help other things, and so got involved in
awesome.
medicine. Yeah.
And Dr. Theo, how was your transition from JP to become specializing in sport medicine?
Yeah, so I did general practice for 15 years, but it always had a little bit of an inclination to sport. Growing up in South Africa is very similar to New Zealand. It's a very sport-orientated community. Everybody, so it was a natural progression for me to combine 2 passions: the passion of sport and the passion of medicine. It was an ideal match for me. So it's absolutely living the dream for me, being involved in sports medicine, because I get up every morning with a passion to go to work. It's not a job that I have to go to. I go to do what I love doing, and so it makes it so much easier for me. General practice has so much to give. It's such a rewarding way of practicing medicine, because you get to know people at so many levels. You get to know them from kids when they're born. You first meet the kids when they're born, and you see them grow up and become adults and then have their own children. And in my practice, I had 2 families where I had 4 generations of the same family that came to see me as a doctor. So you get to know the whole family, and you almost become part of the family in a way. And so you share in all their highs and the lows of the family and things like that. And that was very rewarding. But the challenge or the difference for me between the general practice and sports medicine, with general practice, you always have to push people, say, "Oh, you have to get out there, you have to do more exercise, you have to be more active." While with the sports medicine, it's often the opposite. You have to say, "Whoa, you're not ready yet, wait, you can't go yet, you're just going to hurt yourself, wait a little bit longer," and things. So it's people that are generally well motivated and to get better, and they generally follow the advice that you give them. So that makes it quite rewarding in a sense as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. And how's your work with the Hurricanes? How long you've been following the team now?
I've been the team doctor now for 8 years. I'm going into my ninth season now for them. Before that, I looked after the Wellington Lions, the provincial team, and before that, I looked after Upper Rugby Club. For many years, I was the team doctor for the Upper Rugby Club, and that was good combined with my general practice out in Upper Hutt. yeah. So
That's interesting. What's the most common injury in rugby?
up to very recently, we had a lot of head injuries, so concussion and things like that.
Concussion,
It was the number one injury for us. And then last year there was some rule changes around the tackle area, where people were forced to, or the cutoff point was tackle below the nipples. And that has certainly made a huge difference. We've just been at a conference this week where they showed the results of some of the early studies that have come out, and the rate of concussion has dropped significantly. So that's some good seeing that rugby is actually proactive in addressing serious injuries. They did the same with neck injuries for many years. Significant neck injuries was a big problem, especially in the front rowers with scrum collapses and things like that. And they've changed the rules around that, and it's reduced the amount of neck injuries that we see. Very few rugby players these days that end up with catastrophic neck injuries. So it's good to see that the sport is actually proactive in doing something and not waiting for a crisis to develop before they start changing things. So we see a lot of shoulder injuries in rugby. And again, that's something that's very likely in the near future, where you'll see some rule changes around how we can protect players in vulnerable positions if they're in the breakdown over the ball and get cleaned out over the ball and at the breakdown. That's where we see most of our shoulder injuries. So I think there will be some changes coming in that sphere that may hopefully reduce the risk of that. We do a lot of work in our off season and during the season in injury prevention. It's a big focus for us to drive down our injury numbers.
How's this work?
So our team is made up of, we call it the MedFit team, so the medical and fitness team. It's made up of myself, these two full-time physiotherapists, and then we've got a raft of strength and conditioning coaches. And we work together as a team. We assess our players before the start of the season, look for things that could potentially be risk factors for them to develop injuries, like muscle imbalances, muscle weakness. And then each of them get a program that's specifically targeted for them and tailor-made to fix those shortcomings and things like that, and to try and prevent them from developing injuries in the season. We work with around concussion. The only intervention that's been proven to have some effect on the reduction of concussion is neck strengthening exercises. So we do a lot of work around that, promoting neck strength for our players. It reduces the risk of the whiplash effect, which is the main reason for the concussions and things, rather than the direct blows to the head. It's more the impact of the head moving around and the brain moving around inside the skull. So by strengthening the neck, you can reduce the impact that has. So we would do some work around that.
That's interesting. So if someone is playing rugby in an amateur level, what do you recommend for them to work on the prevention of something like that, this type of injury?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of work that's been done, especially in Australia and the sports medicine field, around how you can prevent injuries and what you can do. And we know that progressive loading of your body over a period of time becomes protective. So if you do a lot of, you start very low and gradually build up the exercise levels that you do, that chronic load that you put on your body becomes a protection. And then you can get exposed to higher impacts and higher exposure to load acutely without the risk of injury. The risk comes in if somebody do develop or do get an injury and they stop their training, and then when they get back they feel that they're so far behind now because they haven't played their sport for a number of years, and then they load themselves up acutely with doing too much too early, and then you develop second injuries and third injuries on top of that, and it becomes a little bit of a cycle. You just come back from an injury, you're not fully recovered, and you get back playing again, and you get injured again, and it becomes a cycle. So we know that we have to gradually build up and protect our body that way. So the preparation, so making sure that when you do get into a sport that you get people around you that can teach you good technique. So learning the right techniques at the start of your sporting endeavours. And then things that you can do with around making sure you've got good nutrition, looking at what foods your body need to build the muscles and to build the strength that you need, and making sure that you recover well, that you build in periodization in your training cycle. You can't always perform at peak level. Your body just can't manage that stress. You need to have a cycle where there are down times and times where you do less and perform at a lower level and gradually build that up. So periodization is important. It's important that you get enough rest. So sleep, appropriate amount of sleep, making sure that you're well hydrated when you exercise and things like that. Those are all important things that you can, as an amateur, you don't need a lot of money to do those things. It's just simple things that you can do to make yourself safe and help you or prevent you from developing injuries.
That's interesting. Just going back a little bit to the concussion, I read the other day, I'm a big fan of floating. And I read about the benefits of floating for to help with the post concussion. And yeah, by the way, I'm one of the ambassadors of Float Well. But it's because I truly believe it's something I practice, and the benefits are it's amazing. And I know you like floating as well, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I'm just seeing for myself there. I mean, moving a little bit away from the injuries and things like that. Just the benefits that I found for myself. I mean, just recovery, from a recovery point of view, it's an ideal water we know is a good environment for muscle recovery and things like that. The hydrostatic pressure of the water and things like that is good as a recovery medium for you. It's good from a mindfulness and a being able to focus and on your job that you have to do as a sports person and things like that. I think that. And then, like you say, I mean, there's definitely some of the early studies now show that there's some advantages in using floating in the recovery stages from concussion. So that's certainly something that's on the radar now, and that it's not mainstream as far as medicine is concerned. It's not a mainstream, but the early research and things like that certainly shows that there's potential benefit in using floating for recovery from concussion.
That's awesome. That's really cool. What's the? It's really interesting because you have this work of the Hurricanes, and at the same time you work with the New Zealand School of Dance. So how's that? What's the main difference about prevention and in injuries as well?
Yeah, I mean so the New Zealand School of Dance, there's two streams at the New Zealand School of Dance, and all the students take part in both the two streams, but they will major in one stream. So you get the classic stream, which is the classic ballet stream, and then the contemporary dance stream. So there's about 96 students in the school. They vary between the ages of 16 and 19, and they come from all over the world. The majority are New Zealanders, but there are a lot of Australians in the School of Dance. There's a girl from Singapore. We've got kids from South America that come over. The school has got a very good reputation worldwide, and so there's a difference in what we see injury-wise between the two streams. The contemporary stream have very similar injuries to rugby. And if you look at the physique of those dancers, they big, strong athletes. They look like power athletes rather than the ballet dancers that you see doing a classic ballet and things like that. So they have very similar, because the movements are explosive and they throw themselves around and things like that. It's a very similar type injuries that we see with rugby,
that's
shoulder injuries and knee injuries and things like that. And then when you look at the classic stream, we'll have more the overuse injuries. So we see a lot of bone stress injuries with the dancers. And it's a little bit complicated as well by the fact that it's an appearance art. So what you look like is very important. And unfortunately, there's, in some spheres of the classic ballet stream, there are still people up to these days still who have the notion that there's a physique that you have to strive for, and unfortunately that physique is means that you have to put your body through.
Has a high cost, huh?
Yeah, it has a high cost. So one of the things that we have to be very mindful in an environment like that is eating disorders, because they try and regulate their appearance by restricting their food intake. And unfortunately, that way that compromises their bone health, and then you develop more likely to develop bone stress and stress fractures and things like that. So it's getting the notion across that it's not weight or things like that, but it's all about your health, your bone health, promoting bone health, and that the things that you need to do to make sure that your bones are healthy and that your bones can heal well. So the difference between the rugby, I mean, it certainly is different ends of the spectrum of sports people, but nonetheless, those dancers are as much athletes as the rugby players, in my view. They work really hard. They're there from 8 till 5 every day, 6 days a week, those kids, and they really put in a lot of effort.
And they're very strong, right?
Yeah, I think pound for pound, they're as strong as the rugby players. I mean, they're not big. The lads aren't very big, and they lift the girls up so effortlessly. So, and they do it over and over and over and over and over again. So, yeah. So I think they, as athletes, I've got as much respect for the ballet dancers than what I have for the rugby players.
That's awesome. And what else? The work you do with the rugby players, for example, with the well-being side. So how much now the traditional medicine it's allowed you to expand towards less conventional things, like for example floating. So do you have this freedom to work with both with the rugby and the dancers?
Yeah, I mean, you are. I mean, for me, the focus has always been on the science behind it. If the science makes sense, then the fact that it's out of left field and not conventional is not such a big restriction anymore. If you can prove with the science that something is working, at some point, all medical treatments were out of the ordinary. New medications are developed all the time that people don't consider to be mainstream until it's been used for a while, and then it's been proven to be effective, and then it becomes mainstream. So I think as a doctor, you also have a responsibility to test those edges. I'm certainly not somebody that would promote quackery and going with things that are completely out of left field, but you have to test the boundaries, and if there's enough evidence to support what you're doing and things like that, and you can start seeing the benefits. And like I say, especially with like things like the floating and things like that, it's over and over. You start reading more evidence about how effective it is and how it works, and then you can start incorporating that in your general practice and how you practice your medicine. The mindfulness specifically, I mean, there's a big focus on mental health, and it's something that New Zealand Rugby Union have picked up and are very proactive about. And from the players' point of view, there are some of the players in our playing environment that's doing a lot of good work around mental health and making it more commonplace for men to talk about how they're feeling and things like that. And again, the floating has been, there's enough evidence to suggest that floating has so many benefits from a mental health point of view. It reduces anxiety, it helps with depression and things like that. So you can certainly see the role where you can use that. I mean, not everything works for everybody, like any other medication, like any other intervention. Some things work for some people, and you need to have faith and trust in the things that you use as well to make them more effective. And that's where the whole effect around placebo and things comes in. You can sometimes see how people, they get prescribed, or not prescribed, but in experiments where they use placebo, where it has such a huge beneficial effect, and you think, but there's no science behind it. There's no science to say why should a placebo work for somebody, and yet it works. So if you believe in something that it's going to be beneficial for you, then the chances that it will be beneficial becomes much bigger. And I think if you trust your healthcare provider, if you have a good relationship with him and they've done good by you in the past, then you're more likely to buy into the things that they're looking at using, and then it's far more likely that it's going to be effective in helping you.
That's interesting. Another thing I read few weeks ago was New Zealand and Australia. It's really ahead of using sport for mental health, for treatment for mental health. That's pretty cool, huh?
Yeah, that's very interesting. And recently there was a study that was done by Harvard that showed that 63% of all deaths that are happening worldwide are due to non-communicable diseases. So those are things like heart disease, diabetes, but also mental health issues and depression and suicide. And the cost of that is astronomical, how much the health cost and the economic impact that will have on countries. So the estimate is that in the next 20 years, those non-communicable diseases will cost $30 trillion.
Wow.
And if you look at that, and if you can save that money by and we know the four major things that contribute to that is smoking, alcohol use, lack of exercise, and unhealthy eating habits. So all of those things are things that we can address, that we can fix. And if we can use that money, that can be used for so much more beneficial things for our societies and things like that. So if you, like you say, New Zealand and Australia, because we're outdoors people, we're active people and things like that, it's much easier to promote that. But you don't have to look very far in the Pacific communities where that it's identified now as major problem areas, and it can be so easily fixed by using sport.
So, Dr. Theo, how about diet? What's your views about diet? Before we just were chatting about this documentary everyone is talking about. What's the name of the documentary again? I forgot. The Game Changers. Game Changers, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So everyone is talking a lot about that, and should I be vegetarian? Should I be eat meat? What's your view, and what's the science, of course, behind of?
Yeah, I think, the Game Changers is a very interesting documentary. I watched it with interest, but like anything, you have to always look at the biases behind it. With all research and things like that, there's always a bias. And you have to think where the bias lies and how much the bias influences the facts that are presented. Because with statistics, you can mount a case for anything.
Right.
And you can say that you can justify anything with statistics if you just use the statistics that fits with what you want to promote. So you always have to take things with a little grain of salt and look at it. But what they presented in their documentary looks very sound. Apart from the weight control and how it can help you with regulating your weight and things like that, what struck me the most about that was the point that they made around inflammation, how animal protein promotes inflammation in your body. And they mounted a very strong case for that. But having said that, if you look at things like some of the studies that are presented by the Meat Board, will have equally strong arguments for why it's beneficial for you to include meat. And I think it's finding a balance and finding what works for you. I think we're all individuals. And what works for one person doesn't necessarily work for another. And I think it's probably finding a balance between, in my view, between vegetarian and full-blown carnivore diets, and it's finding the balance somewhere in between. But there's enough evidence to suggest that we need to look at, in our Western diet, and reducing the amount of red meat, particularly that we're consuming. There's enough evidence now to suggest that that has negative effects on your health. So it's finding the balance, finding what works for you. Even in our professional rugby environment, there are some of our athletes that are vegetarian or vegan, full vegan, and with no detrimental effect on their performance as athletes. They perform as well, if not better, than what they did in the past. So it's hard to think about negative effects if you look at those facts. It's hard to think about what the negative effects of a vegan diet can be.
So, Dr. Theo, what's the for example, the hurricanes are what's the work towards mental health, as we just mentioned before, because it's something has been affected lots of people around us, right? And especially New Zealand, unfortunately, the numbers are pretty sad, right, with mental health.
Yeah.
Do you guys have a specific game plan towards that?
It's interesting you talk about that. I'm currently conducting some research around mental health in Super Rugby. So I've launched last year, started doing some data collection around mental health issues in professional rugby players, and this will be the second part of the information gathering stage that I'm going through, and I hope to be publishing in the next year a research paper on the incidence of mental health in Super Rugby players, because that's been my perception since I've been involved with the Super Rugby. How many of the boys eventually will turn up at your door and reveal that there is something going on. And I think it reflects a little bit the culture in New Zealand, where it's not the done thing for men to talk about how they feel. And I think if we can promote, and New Zealand Rugby Union is proactive again in making it possible and providing avenues for boys to open up and talk about their emotions and how they feel and what's affecting them. And to a large extent, it's driven by the players. There's in our environment, there are some of the players that are openly promoting mental health and encouraging the boys in the group to come out and talk about how they're feeling. So, but it's definitely a big worry, especially with in the Pacific community, where it's even harder for those boys to talk about their emotions and how they feel, because vulnerability is seen as a weakness in many societies, unfortunately. And if you look at the facts that showing your vulnerability is actually a strength, it takes a lot more strength to show your vulnerable side than it is to show the macho side. So I think if you can make that mindset, the change in the mindset, that will help to promote mental health. And if it becomes obvious for the rugby players or for our sports personalities and things like that, if they are able to talk about it, it will open it up for general population to talk about it as well. I just remember from my general practice background, you walk in on a Monday and all of a sudden there are 3 or 4 middle-aged white men that come in and talk about depression, and then it doesn't take long to figure out that the weekend before they ran the ad where John Kirwan was talking about his depression and how he struggled with depression, and because he was such an iconic rugby player in New Zealand, the fact that he talked about it made it possible for the guy on the street to come to the doctor and talk about their mental health.
Wow, that's very
interesting. And it was so obvious when they ran those ads, the couple of weeks after they ran the ads, how men would open up and talk about how they feel. So I think if we can do that again, if we can replicate that with our current All Blacks and sporting personalities and things like that, I think it will definitely go a long way to promoting mental health.
So, Dr. Theo, what's your advice for someone, for example, it's dealing with some mental health issues and it's holding that for the reasons you just mentioned? What's your advice for someone going through a hard time right now?
Yeah, I think the main thing is to find a safe environment where you can talk about how you feel, and find the person or the people that you can trust, because revealing your emotions opens you up and it leaves you in a very vulnerable position. And if you do it with people that you can't trust with that vulnerability, it can be very detrimental. So you need to find somebody in the first place that you can talk to that is safe and receptive, and you can trust with dealing with and talking about it. But the main thing is to open up and talk about it. And if the first person, if you don't get the answers from talking to the first person, is to go to somebody else and until you find somebody that can help you. And that can sometimes be daunting. I realize that. I think, and if you're struggling with depression, it's not always easy to have the energy to even go up to people and talk about how you're feeling and things like that. So you need to pick your moments, and you need to pick. And I think we as a society have a responsibility. And it's not if we're honest, it's not that difficult to pick people that are struggling. We all know those people in our environments, and we can all see them in our environments. But we also stand back sometimes, and we don't approach people and just be kind to people. Providing a kind environment where you can actually talk about how you feel.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Why do you think it's too? It's a cultural thing, or it's a male thing? What's your views on that? Why it's so difficult to talk about those things?
I definitely think it's cultural. I think it's a cultural issue. I mean, we all brought up from Victorian era where men are not allowed to be weak. We are supposed to be the strong, especially men, but a lot more women as well. But especially for men, you're not allowed to be weak. You have to be strong, and you have to support everybody, and you have to be the one to fix the problems. You're not supposed to be the one with the problems and the one that need the help. So if that's what the culture is, and that's what everybody believes, is that you have to be strong all the time, then to open up and say, look, actually, I'm struggling. I'm not coping. I'm not doing this, becomes quite hard. Because we've got the perception that society will frown upon us if we're weak. If we show our vulnerable side, society will frown on that, and we will be seen as not living up to the expectation of what's expected of us as males, particularly. So women are traditionally more open about talking about their emotions and about how they're feeling and things like that. So and that's why if you look at the statistics around suicide and things like that, the rate among especially young men is so out of proportion to the rest of society, and it all boils down to the fact that we can't talk about it.
Even it's interesting because between males and females, the vocabulary as well with females is way vast than the males. No, it's so interesting. I noticed that in one of the main things work at the Ramataka prison as a volunteer, and I work at the female prison as well, and the difference of so the men they only express themselves when they're in a group, but if you try to talk to them in individually, it's super hard. Different than the woman there. The woman they express themselves all the time. They not only that, but they wake up in the morning, they pick up the phone, so they still run their family, even inside of that environment, and that's super super interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, women are considered to be the weaker gender, but I don't think that's true. I think women have proven over and over and over that they're actually the stronger ones. I mean, like you say, if you've got kids to look after, you've got a household to run and things like that, you just have to get on with it. And if you're feeling down, you still get up in the morning and you do that, and you just keep going with the things that you have to do. And women are naturally better in forming support structures. They're far more likely to get together with their friends and have a hug and feel better and things like that. We don't do that as men. You shy away from other men. I mean, I think it's a cultural thing. We don't express to one another as men. We don't do that. We don't show one another that we care and things like that, because you look after yourself, man. You sort your own stuff out. You don't expect other people to sort it out for you. Well, women are far more caring. That's the nature of women. They're caring people, much more so than we are as men.
Yeah. So Dr. Theo, what's your advice for for someone to looking to improve the health and their well-being in general? What if someone is overweight and would like to start a new journey? What's your advice?
Yeah, so the main things that I think you look at is first of all your food intake, and I mean I'm not talking about going on restrictive diets and things like that necessarily, but start with small things. We all now these days know what are healthy food and what's not healthy food. We all know that eating chocolate bars and drinking fizzy drinks is not the healthy thing. We don't need to be told that. But we all know the good things as well. We all know that fruit and vegetables and things like that is a healthier choice. So it's making healthy choices around your food, not become obsessed with food as the enemy, but using food to your advantage and using the food that are look at the energy density of food rather than thinking. If you look at a chocolate bar, it's very energy dense. There's a lot of energy in a very small amount. While if you look at fruit and vegetables, it's not so energy dense, so you can consume a lot more and have a full tummy for a longer period of time without getting so much energy. And so it's the one thing.
That's very interesting. Yeah.
That's the first thing to look at is your food intake, making sure that you keep well hydrated, drinking lots of water during the day and keep yourself well hydrated. Start with regular exercise. The recommendations are that you should in a week do 150 minutes of regular exercise. So 30 minutes 5 days a week of regular exercise, moderate intensity exercise. So it's not just going for a gentle stroll around the block. It needs to be something that gets your heart rate going and gets you to build up a sweat and things like that. It's not just people think that, just go for a gentle stroll for half an hour and things like that. Has very little impact on your health. You need to do something that's actually a challenge for your body to do. Making sure you get plenty of rest and sleep to recover. If you do more exercise and things, your body needs to recover from those exercises as well. So you need some time to rest and recover from that. General well-being. I think mindfulness and meditation is a critical part for me for my general well-being. I do make it's all about the discipline for me, about sitting down and actually doing it. Because it's so easy when we all live busy lives, and so easy we all try and fit our exercise in at the end of the day. You live your whole day and then try and do the exercise at the end of the day. And very often you get home and you think, I'm just too tired, I can't be bothered today. Yeah. Well, my advice to people is to plan your day around your exercise. Start with the first thing that I'm planned for today is at what point in the day will I be doing my exercise, and then fit the rest of the day around that. If it means that you have to get up half an hour earlier in the morning to do your 30 minutes of exercise, then do it. It's a good investment and it's a habit. If you get to do it regularly, it becomes easy. The first couple of times it's hard to get up in the morning a half an hour earlier than what you usually do. But if you do it and you make that the focus, is the first priority for the day is the regular exercise, getting the exercise in. It becomes a good habit and it becomes easier to do the longer you do it. I mean, I was somebody that came very late to exercise in my life. I always joke and say I was the intellect. I was never the one to do the exercise and things like that. And about 6-7 years ago, I got challenged by my son. He was doing a gap year over in Japan and was over here for school holidays. And he gave me a voucher to a gym and said, I'm coming back at the end of the year. I want to see some changes. And for me, a challenge like that is like a red flag to a bull. You don't throw a challenge out. If you put the challenge out for me, I'll take you on for that. And I started doing it, and it was going to the gym was a very confronting experience for me. It was it was not my thing, but I kept going at it and kept going and going and going, and now I can't wait to get to the gym in the day to do my exercise.
Yeah, it's impressive. I was a little while without to see you, and I was shocked when I saw you last time, because you look way stronger than the amount of weights I felt, wow, I need to get my game up because you're doing really well. Yeah, lifting lots of weights.
And
amazing.
it's made such a big difference for me, just the regular exercise, and it's changed so many other things in my life for me. Like my productivity, my energy levels are so much higher. It's amazing, and I now regret those years that I've missed that I didn't do it, and thinking, oh my goodness, what have I missed out on all this time? I thought I was doing so well, and now I experiencing the positive effects that it has for me, and like from a mental point of view, from mindfulness, from physical health, it's made a huge difference in my life, regular exercise.
That's amazing. So, Dr. Theo, what has been changing now for in medicine the last 30 years? You've been practicing that for what was the most significant change you saw in the health area?
I think health, for me, the biggest change that I've noticed in health is that we've moved away from a model where we were treating disease to a model where we're trying to prevent disease. I think that's a big mind shift. That was the positive change for me. There's some negative changes that I see in health care as well. And I think, unfortunately, I've got very strong views on this, and it's big pharmaceutical companies. I think they've got a lot to answer for. It's almost like new diseases get designed when patents of old medicine start running out, and drug companies need to bring new products onto the market. If there's no more new diseases, what do? You create a new disease, and then you have a medication just right to fit that disease. And I think there's a lot to answer for big pharmacological companies. It's a very personal view, and I know it's not necessarily a view that's held by a lot of people in the medical profession, but I think there's definitely things to answer for around that. But on the positive side, health prevention or prevention of disease and things is good. The detection, the ability for us to pick diseases up at a much earlier stage, like if you think about cancers and things like that. The treatment has become more effective and when we treat it, but because the interventions happen much earlier now, we can have so much more impact and can actually prolong people's lives and things. So there's been some really good developments. Another slightly more negative development in more recent years again is how we've become quite complacent about health as well. If you look at the sudden increase in the measles epidemic that's broken out, I mean, with immunization and things like that, we were doing such great work, and we almost eradicated diseases like measles and things like that. It was unheard of to hear about people in developed countries to develop measles and things like that. And all of a sudden, here we are today with a major outbreak of a measles epidemic in New Zealand. And you think, well, why is this? And it's because people have become complacent, because we didn't have to worry about immunizing our kids anymore because there was no measles. Why would you immunize your kids against something that doesn't happen? And then it doesn't take a big thing, and all of a sudden now it's a crisis.
Wow. That's interesting. Yeah, so Dr. Theo, you surround yourself with lots of high performance athletes in both sides, the hurricane and the dancers. And can you identify the habits of the most successful ones around you? So can you see the patterns, and which habits are those?
Yeah, I think that definitely there's some people that will become good athletes because they've got obviously the physical abilities. They've got the right attributes from a physical point of view. But you can get people with good physical attributes that never make it as good sports people, and it's all boils down to the attitude and people's approach to how they approach life. We had an interesting talk the other day from a motivational speaker who goes to a lot of professional sporting teams, and he says you walk into the environment and everybody has got all the writing on the wall and all the motivational quotes on the wall, and some of those teams are successful, but other teams are not successful. And why is that? They use the same motivational tools. They all talk the same language and things like that. Why do they not? And I think it boils down to the attitude. It's all good and well to put motivational quotes on your wall, but if you don't live it, if it doesn't come from inside you, if you don't have the drive to do things, it takes discipline. I think that for me is from my own point of view with regular exercise and things like that. If I have to go to the gym every time or only go to the gym the times when I'm motivated to go to the gym, I probably will never get to the gym. So if I have to rely on a quote on the wall to make me go to the gym, it's going to be a sad day because I won't go there. And it's a lot about just, that's the discipline. You sometimes have to be disciplined, and that's what breeds the success at the end. It's just sticking to it when the hard times come, when it's difficult to get up. And I often say to athletes, for me, the marker of professionalism with athletes is not so much how they approach their training and their games, but if you look at people who get injured and how they approach their rehabilitation afterwards, that's where you see the difference. There are some athletes that put as much, if not more, effort into their rehabilitation, and they are the ones that become successful. While others, rehabilitation is a boring thing because it's over and over and you don't do what you want to do. You want to be out on the field, you want to play rugby and things like that. But now you're stuck, all of a sudden you're stuck in the gym because you have to do the rehab. And if you don't have the right mental attitude to do that, the fortitude to stick with the hard times and do the work when the hard times come around, it's very hard to live to your full expectation.
Wow, that's so powerful. That's so powerful. Can you give one example of a mindset of someone who got injured and managed to get through that with some?
Yeah, I think in looking just in our environment, just in the recent past, somebody like I won't go into the details about the injury, but somebody like TJ Perenara, for instance, as a prime example of somebody who, when he gets injured, he'll be the one to come and knock on my door and say, what can I do to get better sooner? What else can I do? What more can I do to get better? And he gets better quicker than somebody that you have to go and say, have you done your exercises for today? No, I haven't done them yet. Well, let's go. Let's get you going. Go and do the exercises and things like that. That, to me, makes a huge difference. And you can see that, and those are the people that are successful in life, are the ones on the sporting field anyway, are the ones that are prepared to do the work in the hard times where nobody sees you doing the work.
That's amazing. That's super interesting. So, Dr. Theo, to finish that, if you could go back to 30 years ago when you started studying medicine and could give advice to your young self, which advice would you give to yourself?
I think the advice that I would give myself is to make sure that you focus on work-life balance. You need the balance. Life for me is all about the balance, and it's something that I probably missed the mark on a lot when I was younger. The focus was always on driving the work and getting the work done and making sure that I'm the best that I could be in my work, but missing out on realizing the benefits when you have the balance right, when you get the balance right and you get your life balance better, promotes your work as well, makes your work better because you become more productive. You think if you have to just put more work in and more work in and more work in, but it becomes, the more you do, the less efficient that work becomes because you run out of steam and things like that. You can't spend 100% of your time focused if it's just all the time driven. You need to have those times away from it and the breaks in between to be able to be more productive in your work. So finding a balance, I think, is very important.
That's super powerful. Really cool. Dr. Theo, thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure. Lots of good messages here. I'm going to listen to this podcast again. It's super interesting. Thank you so much for your time. Yeah, it was a pleasure to have you.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a real pleasure. I really enjoyed that. And yeah.
Thank you. And thank you, Colin, as well, our producer. We could not make this happen without him. We need to insert your picture, Colin, on the... Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was awesome. How long was that?